Welcome to Gospel Tangents Podcast. I'm Rick Bennett. When Adolf Hitler came to power, one of the things he wanted to do was to find Jews and Jewish ancestry. He did this through genealogy. Of course, the LDS Church is also very interested in genealogical research. How did the LDS Church respond to Hitler's requests? The answer may be surprising to you. We'll also talk about the 1936 Olympics. How did Mormon missionaries help out with the German Olympic effort? The answer is very interesting, and Dr. David Nelson will tell us more about it in our next conversation. I also want to point out, all of our books are still on sale this week. Here's our latest from Greg Prince. So please get that now. All of our books are 25 to 50% off. If you hurry, you might be still able to get it before Christmas. Remember, these are going back to regular prices after Christmas, so be sure to purchase your copies now. I also want to thank Roland, Wasatch Intercept, and Will, and James for following us on Facebook or commenting on YouTube. Thanks a lot, really appreciate it. Please share more with your friends and help more people to find out about Gospel Tangents. Now back to our conversation.
The Mormons did genealogy, and we know we both have a Mormon background. We both know why Mormons do genealogy, and and that's to research and eventually baptize ancestors who have passed away so that they can receive temple ordinances and they can receive eternal exaltation. We all know why the Germans did genealogy. They did genealogy to identify anybody with Jewish blood so that the Jews could eventually be eliminated from the face of the earth. Now, it wasn't said like that at the beginning, but that was what exactly the point was. So here we are. Let's say we're a year before Hitler comes to power. Okay, the Mormons they don't have stakes and wards. They've got districts and they've got branches. And in the Weimar Republic, the Mormon Church, especially between the end of hyperinflation in 1923 and the beginning of the Depression, 1929, those 6 years, Germany is doing pretty well. Well, the Mormon Church is doing pretty well in Germany now because people are prosperous and the church has lots of rights under the Weimar Constitution. The church, all of a sudden, even as foreigners, has freedom of speech. Okay, so what's happening is that the old Catholic priest and Lutheran ministers who used to file nuisance complaints against the Mormons in Wilhelmine and Imperial Germany, the police aren't listening to them anymore. And so the Mormons are walking the streets without being harassed. Well, okay. So one thing the Mormons can't do at this time yet, it's a year before Hitler has come to power, the Mormons can go into state archives and look up birth certificates and death certificates and marriage certificates. They cannot go into the Catholic Church and Lutheran Church archives. Oh, they could if they would let them, but the pastors and the priests said, Mormons, you're coming in here looking at our genealogical records? We know why you want our genealogical records. You want to baptize your deceased relatives, our deceased relatives. You want to baptize good German Catholics and good German Lutherans and make them into Mormon. Hit the road. We're not going to help you do that. We're not going to help you mine our archives for your proselytizing purposes, especially since it's disrespectful to even think under their religion's beliefs that someone who's dead could be baptized. Mormons are the only ones who baptize dead, for the dead. So what happens when Hitler comes to power on January 31st, 1933? Shortly after that time, the mandate comes that all Germans have to fill out their pedigree charts. Not German Mormons, all Germans, and prove that they're not Jews. So the pressure is put on by the government, and all of a sudden, the Lutheran Church archives and the Catholic Church parish records are wide open. So it is genealogy time for the Mormon branches and Mormon districts there. It used to be, during the 1920s, during the Weimar Republic, that each district equivalent of a stake, but smaller, would have one genealogy leader, and this genealogy leader would go around all the branches and say, hey, how about devoting some time, to doing your pedigree charts and your family group records? Well, guess what happened after Hitler took power? Each branch was appointing a genealogy president, 2 genealogy counselors, and a genealogy secretary. Okay, the Der Stern, which was the weekly German language newspaper, was running all kinds of articles and on genealogy techniques. The Mormon, the districts, stakes, they are expanding the program outside the church. They're running ads in newspapers. They're panning a handbook. Come to the Mormons for help with doing your genealogy. Well, it was a little ridiculous because Germans knew how to do genealogy. They didn't have to go to the Mormons for help. But they said, let's do it. And maybe what we can do is we can take some of these German names and go submit them to the temple. Maybe they're not just our relatives. The price of genealogy supplies, family group records, and pedigree sheets are cut in half. There are now genealogical youth organizations within the LDS Church in Germany. They're having special genealogy days for the Young Men's and Young Women's Mutual Improvement Association. It was just one of these things where the desires and needs of the church coincide with the desires and needs of the Nazi government. And the Mormons were not afraid to shout from the rooftops and to put articles in the Deseret News back home with how wonderful it's become for the church now that the genealogical archives doors have swung open, quote, so that everyone could prove that their grandmother was not a Jewess, unquote. You just look at this and you say, what are these people thinking? But that's another, and that's a theme of my book, is that the Mormons found in Nazi Germany, they all of a sudden, they found commonalities. We can ask about basketball.
I was going to ask about that.
Okay.
Go ahead.
In 1936, Germany is going to hold the Olympics. The Winter Olympics in Garmisch-Partenkirchen in January, and the Summer Olympics in Berlin in August. These Olympics were awarded by the IOC years before Hitler took power, and it was supposed to be a way of healing for Germany. After the destruction of World War I, finally Germany was going to host an Olympics, and people were going to come to Germany, and people who had fought terrible battles on the fields of Flanders and all that were going to run against each other. And well, anyway, Hitler comes to power, and the world is not very happy, but Germany is still going to hold the Olympics. But a lot of forces in the world are trying to boycott especially the Summer Olympics, because they know that Hitler is going to use this as a showcase of Aryan supremacy. But, well, there's an opportunity here. The German sports authorities never heard of basketball, okay? They don't have any basketball players. But because they're the home country, they feel that they have the obligation to field a team in every sport. They may go somewhere else for the Olympics and they won't do a sport, but this is Germany, and everybody else is going to be bringing their basketball team over. They would look awfully bad if they had basketball competition in Germany and didn't have a team. So how do we do a team? Well, they did it very methodically. The only people that knew anything about basketball in Germany at the time were a few foreign university students from the United States and Canada, and guess who? The Mormon missionaries. So what they do is the first thing they do is they pick their athletes. They decide that the German basketball team is going to be consistent of the German second-string handball team. Now, I'm not talking about the indoor handball that we play here in the United States. It was kind of like field hockey, outside handball that was played in Europe at the time. So the German Sports Authority said, okay, we know you guys don't know a thing about basketball, but you're athletes. You know, you've been to our professional sports schools, and you were picked for one of our national teams, even though it was a second-string team. So obviously, you've got lung capacity, you've got endurance, you've got speed, and we'll find some way to train you to be a basketball player. How did they train them to be a basketball player? The Mormon missionaries, okay? The Mormon missionaries had brought basketballs over just to play on the equivalent of the P-Day back then. I don't know if they called it P-Day back then, but, you know, to blow off steam, because this was the heyday of the all-church basketball tournaments that were going on in Salt Lake City every summer, when there were about 8,000 Mormon boys that would show up in August, and they would have they would play on ward and stake teams. You know, so Mormon missionaries know about basketball. So what's happened is the Mormon missionaries set about a routine by which they would teach these designated German athletes how to pass, shoot, dribble, and play defense. And they start playing with them, and at first, the guys don't have any skill set, so the missionaries are beating them very handily. By the end of 6 months, the German team is beating the missionary team because they're better athletes. And they're learning how to shoot, and they're learning how to block out, you know, and all those things that you do, and how to set picks, and all those things that you do in basketball. So then when the game, so about 6 months before the games then, the budget kicks in, and the missionaries are excused, and the Germans actually hire a professional basketball coach who is a German. Of all things, he was a basketball coach at an American school in Turkey, but he was a native German, and he taught basketball, he coached basketball there. So he came back and he did the X's and O's for the German basketball team, which did horrible. They lost every game, you know, because, I mean, the finals between America, the United States and Canada, and the Americans beat the Canadians in a driving rainstorm. I didn't mention it was done on a clay tennis court.
Oh my goodness, it was outdoors.
It was outdoors.
Wow.
And during a rainstorm, okay? But the point is that the Germans, and you know who the scorebook keepers are the Mormon missionaries.
No way.
They're the Mormon missionaries. When I was doing my research, there was one of them that was still alive, and I called him and talked to him at home all about it, you know.
That's cool.
So, you know, this is what's happening here. And the last thing, of course, this propensity to brag about it. In the Deseret News at the time, and in the Salt Lake Tribune, there are wire services running stories from January through August of '36 about these attempts to make worldwide boycotts of the Hitler Olympics. And the Deseret News is picking up this wire service copy and running it, just like everybody else's newspaper is. Well, out comes in January of '36, out comes a big picture. A 6-column newspaper broadsheet has 8 columns. What's a 6-column picture of this two basketball teams in white shorts. One of them is everybody on the team is doing the raised armed Hitler salute, and on the other one they're standing at the position of attention, and there's a ball in the middle. And the big story, and the headline on the story says, "New ways of proselytizing and the reasons therefore." And then down in the body of the text of the story, it said, and in Germany, the missionaries are helping Herr Hitler's team win what it hopes will be a gold medal in the Berlin Olympic Games. So on the same edition of the newspaper, you have stories about how Hitler is abusing his Jews and how the world is trying to, at least liberals in the world, are trying to boycott the Olympics. And over on the next page, the church section, which they didn't have to pull out church news back then, it was just church section. You got this picture of these basketball players giving the stiff arm salute,
Absolutely.
And so, I mean, again, what is going on in your world? Don't you know what's going on? I can see why you're trying to keep the church alive, you know, in Nazi Germany. But my goodness, be a little discreet about what's going on.
I mean, so what kind of advice would you give? I mean, it's an international church. We have an article of faith that says, we're subject to kings, rulers, magistrates.
Yeah.
How does an international church such as the Mormon Church deal with repressive regimes? I mean, it sounds like you disagree with what they did, but I mean,
well, I'm after the fact. Okay, this is hindsight. I'm looking at it, but historians try to put themselves in the shoes of the people that are going on there. And the funny thing about it, you mentioned the 12th Article of Faith. That was a prime survival strategy. In Nazi Germany, we obey the law. You may be a good Latter-day Saint and you may be a good member of the National Socialist Party, and they don't conflict. And we do not, we're going to clean up all of our tracts and all of our hymnals of this Jewish sounding stuff because we don't want you to get the wrong idea about us. Okay? We not only obey the letter of law, we obey the spirit of the law. And we do not discuss politics. We do not do anything like that. We obey the law. Well, we talked a little bit earlier in this interview about what it was like for the Mormons and the tough times that they had during the 19th century. And they had the 12th Article of Faith back then. But they weren't real observers of the 12th Article of Faith back then, were they? Missionaries were pawned off as English teachers or commercial merchants. And when a missionary had to plead guilty on a trumped-up charge because he didn't do anything wrong except be there as a missionary, but in order to keep from going to jail, he accepted a plea bargain and said he would leave the country. He didn't leave the country. He went over to the next German state. So the fact of the matter is that the Mormons got better and better at obeying the 12th Article of Faith, the more repressive that the government got. So, I mean, I'm a historian. I present what happened, and, you can accuse me, people can, and rightfully will, that are looking at this podcast, will probably say, well, he's exercising 20/20 hindsight. But this is what happened. Mm-hmm. And you see, and the other big deal about my book, there's one real part about my book we haven't talked about yet, and this is the really important part, is that everybody knew that read the Deseret News or read Der Stern or read the Millennial Star, which is the European mission newspaper, that the Mormons were actively pursuing good relations with the German government during this time. People wrote letters to the editor, missionaries wrote letters to the editor after that article in the Völkischer Beobachter talking about how wonderful that the church is doing. Everybody knew that the church's missionaries were not in trouble in Nazi Germany and that the church was trying as hard as it could to get along, and they were not a bit ashamed of it. After the Second World War, and especially in the light of the Hellmuth Huber incident, what happened is that the stories started coming out about how the Mormons were persecuted under the Third Reich. And the fact of the matter is that they weren't persecuted under the Third Reich. When Hellmuth Huber, a young man in Hamburg, in 1942, after the missionaries had gone home, took up listening to the German language broadcast of the BBC and writing seditious pamphlets on a church typewriter with carbon paper and scattering them around the neighborhood. Got himself arrested. His two companions, Karl-Heinz Schnibe and Rudi Voba, got arrested. Hellmuth Huber was convicted of treason and guillotined, and the boys, his two companions, were sent to prison. All of a sudden, the fact that the Gestapo came and interviewed Huber's branch president and interviewed other members of the branch, that got, there's a little literary license taken with that. All of a sudden, those hostile interviews were happening all over Germany. And no, the Mormons were never persecuted in Germany for being Mormons. Mormons who got in trouble in Nazi Germany got in trouble because of things that they had done as individuals. There was a big old strapping guy named Heinrich Verbs, who was just a normal German Mormon, who made an intemperate remark on a streetcar in Hamburg, and he got reported and he got thrown in a concentration camp. Well, if you'd have been a Catholic or a Lutheran and made an intemperate remark about the Nazi Party or Hitler, you'd have been thrown in a concentration camp. Okay, there were some missionaries that were on foot, going from one little town to another little town in 1936 or 37, 1936, and they were taking pictures of a coal mine. Well, military intelligence came along and arrested them, because this is the same week that Hitler was remilitarizing the Rhineland, and that the German government was really scared that if the French had hit back and gone against the Wehrmacht at that time, that they'd have lost, because they didn't. The German army was not strong enough then. So the German security forces were on edge. A couple innocent missionaries are taking pictures of a coal mine, and all of a sudden that's espionage. Okay? Well, they were arrested. They were arrested, they complained, the word got back to the mission office. The mission president hired a lawyer. After 2 or 3 days, they were let go with a stern lecture. And, you know, I mean, things happen like that in countries that are mobilizing for war. We had another missionary on foot that stumbled across military maneuvers and was taking pictures of target practice. The same thing happened to him. There was a missionary in Hamburg who, he asked for the addresses of all the mailing addresses of all Mormon soldiers in the local army units so that he could mail them church literature. Well, German military intelligence got involved and says, here we have some foreign resident asking for addresses of German soldiers where they could be contacted. This sounds like espionage to us. And that German guy and those people were held for 2 or 3 weeks. There was a young missionary that had been serving in the mission office down in Basel, Switzerland, when it was still the Swiss and German mission. He was very politically astute, a very smart young man. Since he was such a good missionary, he spent most of his time in the office because he was an administrator. He was like an AP or a district, zone leader or something like that. So he's used to writing very critical letters home to the United States about Germany and about Hitler. And he's mailing them from Switzerland, so there's never a problem. In his last couple months of duty before he rotates home for his release, like they did with a lot of office missionaries back then, is they sent him out to win a few converts, to knock on some doors, and maybe then he'll have a few faith-inspiring stories to take home and tell at his missionary, welcome home, and have something to say when he's the elders quorum president about back when I was a missionary, other than, I put stamps on envelopes and stuff like that. Well, he goes to Frankfurt, or not Frankfurt, some little town, and he starts writing letters home again, criticizing Hitler and the Nazis. Well, guess who intercept the letters? The German postal censors who monitor mail of foreign citizens. He got thrown in prison, and they had to, Fleeman Kelly was the mission president back then, and he had to hire German lawyers to convince the local police to let him go. So, the fact is that the Mormons were never persecuted in Nazi Germany, and certainly not for being religious missionaries.
Mm-hmm.
If they got into trouble, they got into trouble because of something that they did.
Okay. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. David Nelson. In our next conversation, we'll talk about Hellmuth Huber. You've probably heard a little bit about him. There was a play done at BYU about his life where he stood up to Hitler, but it turns out some church leaders weren't very happy with the play.
Elder Monson arrives, and he takes in the play, and he just doesn't seem to be as happy, according to other witnesses, as the rest of them. The word comes down 2 days later through Dowling Oaks. There will be no more productions of Huber against the Reich.
I hope you join us for our last and final segment with Dr. David Nelson. Since it's the end of the year, I wanted to ask a special favor. We're going to do a year-end review of all the fun interviews we've done here at Gospel Tangents, and I'd like to hear what you think was your most favorite interviews, as well as what were the most surprising things you learned over this past year on Gospel Tangents. You can email me at gospeltangents@gmail.com, or you can also check out this link that I've got for a special survey. I'd like to include any comments you have in our year-end special. It'll be coming next week. So please include that as soon as you can, either by email or you can fill out the survey. Thanks a lot, I'd really appreciate it. Don't forget to click here to subscribe, up here for a transcript, and over here you can see some of our other videos. Thanks again.